This week, we sound like John Christ from the original DANZIG album using a KATANA and an HX effects. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Effects Loop. I am your host, Jay Byrne. I'm doing something this week it's not different, it's just something else that I wanted to try. This is a series. If this goes over well, it's going to be a series called Tone Chasin'. And I just wanted to take what I had, which is the KATANA Artist Mark II head and cabinet, and I have an HX effects, and I'm like, I wanted to see if I could get close to sounding like some of my favorite guitar tones, which I think I did a pretty good job, and you'll see for yourself. So what we're gonna do is, I've always been a huge fan of Danzig's first album. Well, Danzig was in the Misfits first, but this is Danzig's, after Sam Hain. Danzig did a band called Sam Hain. And after that, he went and did these, I guess you could call them solo albums, but he's always been kind of like forming new bands and recording stuff. But this was the first Danzig album, which has songs that you know, like Twist of Cain, Mother, like those are the songs that you'll hear me using clips from before, because those are the ones that people recognize. Unfortunately, I'm not going to put any clips from the actual album in this video, because if I do, it's going to be immediately copyright claimed, and I don't know if it'd be a problem or not. But you will hear my renditions of those sounds in the video. And if you want to hear what the original versions sound like, maybe what I can do is I can actually put a link at the end of the video to like the music videos or some audio clips that are online already. So if you want to hear them, you can compare them yourself and see if it actually sounds like it. So apparently, John Christ, the album was released in 1988, and it was produced by Rick Rubin, who's known for having, he likes a very raw, kind of in the room type of sound. The guitars are played by John Christ. So I'm not exactly sure where this article came from, but there was an article where John Christ talked about the recording of the original Danzig album. And this is one of the most detailed descriptions that are out there about what actually happened during the recording of that album and what he used and whatnot. The interviewer said, "Was that guitar used to record anything on Danzig?" They were talking about the BC Rich guitars, actually, because I guess John Christ was known for playing BC Rich guitars, certain ones. But John Christ answered, "No. We had done a show with Slayer in Los Angeles at the Palladium when a riot broke out because the promoters had oversold the show by a couple of hundred tickets. There were people outside breaking windows with police and helicopters everywhere, and all this was going on while we were on stage. At any rate, on the flight out there, we didn't have road cases for our guitars or anything, and the neck on my BC Rich got broken. They just threw it down the ramp and bam, snapped the neck. I got back to the hotel and just couldn't believe it was broken, and the gig was tomorrow. But I had my Les Paul and also borrowed a Mockingbird off of Kerry King, Slayer's guitarist. When I got back to New York, I only had the one guitar, and we were supposed to start recording the first Danzig record. The Les Paul just didn't sound that good, so I went to Sam Ash Music on 48th Street. They lined up every guitar in the place, and I sat there for hours going through every guitar they had, playing some chords, parts of Twist of Cain and Am I Demon, just to see what sounded the fullest. I ended up choosing a Paul Reed Smith guitar because it had the overall fullest sound. We rented that guitar from the music store, and that was the one that I did all the rhythm tracks with. As far as amps in the studio, I think we used a Bedrock amp on a couple of songs, until we blew it up. We also used a couple of rented Marshalls with my old cabinet. When the time came to go in and do vocal overdubs and solos, I had the BC Rich back. I used that with my old Laney amplifier and Marshall cabinet for the solos. That was pretty much it. Okay, so let's talk about the settings on the amp. This is, I'm using a KATANA Artist Mark II for these sounds, which, you know, is not what John Christ from Danzig played, obviously. but I'm trying to do this use something that's sort of common that I think there's a lot of people out there who have, so they could maybe try to get this sound if they had that. It's going through this 212 cabinet, which has the WAZA greenback speakers in them, okay? So basically he was known for using greenback speakers. He used an old Marshall cab. So this is close. This is the same type of sound that he would have been using at the time. So that's going for us right there. Now if you're using a regular Katana, you're just using the stock speaker in the regular Katana, it might be a bit brighter, so you're probably going to have to dial it back, like as far as the treble and the tone and that stuff is concerned. But if you're using the Katana Artist, the Mach II, the regular, the Mach I, I mean, they're very, very similar. That comes stock with a greenback style speaker. I think it's called a G12W or something like that. And it's the Katana WAZA greenback speaker, which is basically a higher powered greenback is what it's supposed to be. So let's talk about the settings on the actual amp. What am I doing on the actual amp itself? Well, I'm using the crunch channel because, why am I using the crunch channel? I'm using the crunch channel because, okay, rumor has it, he used something called a Bedrock amp as well. However, when they were recording the album, the Danzig album, but rumor has it there were plexis, Marshall plexis in the studio. So if you want to get like a Marshall-like sound, these Katanas are kind of known for making a Marshall-esque sound. You can get, if you put it on the crunch channel, it's sort of a Voxy / JCM 800 kind of thing going on with the crunch channel on a Katana. So you can get that kind of that like Marshall sound out of the crunch channel, basically. So what I've got is I've got my gain on 50. I always keep my volume on 50, and I adjust my master to taste basically as far as the volume in the room. Honestly, these sounds were not tested at extremely high volumes. You can get these sounds at lower volumes as well. I mean, I've been playing them at lower volumes, not dead quiet, but lower volumes. My bass is 50. My mid-range is at 60. I just kicked it up just a tiny bit because I wanted to get a little bit more growl in the sound, not as scooped. My treble is 50. This is how I usually keep them anyway. I'm actually using a room reverb because there is a slight bit of reverb on the guitars on the album, but I think it's just the room sound from when the album was recorded. So sort of trying to emulate that by using, like, we are talking a hair of like room reverb on it, just to give it a little bit of dimensionality, a little bit of just something going on. And my presence is set at 50. Like I said, this is the way I usually keep my stuff set. I am not using the tone shape, the global EQ, the contour, none of that. I am, however, on the cab resonance, I have it on deep. I did have it on modern when I was working on this setting, and I thought it sounded pretty close. But when I clicked it over to deep, it scooped the sound just a tiny bit. It added a little more bass and a little more sizzle in the high end, and it sounds more like what I'm hearing when I'm listening to the actual album. So these are the settings that I'm working with on the amp. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what I'm doing inside the HX effects, how I'm using my helix. This is really simple. This isn't even a patch. I am literally using a pedal. I'm using this as the equivalent of just running a pedal in front of my amp. I'm actually using what's called the Minotaur. So what it is it's a clone style pedal. It's supposed to be a clone of the clone, basically. I went through a whole bunch of pedals and I tried them all. And to my ears, this clone, this Minotaur, actually gave me the best possible, the closest sound to what I was trying to get. What I'm basically doing is I'm goosing the crunch channel. I'm adding an overdrive like you would to the front of a Marshall. Now, it's said that John Christ himself from Danzig is using he's alive, he would use an EQ just to kind of, like one of the Boss GE7 EQs, just to kind of goose it a little bit and get a little bit more crunch out of the sound, just to get it a little bit louder. I found that this Klon added a little bit more mid-range to the sound, maybe because I'm using the Katana. Maybe it actually works best with the Katana. I'm not really sure why this works and something else doesn't. Although boosting the front end does give the Katana a little bit more crunch, a little bit more just of that crunchiness to the sound. And I found that the Klon, the Minotaur model in the HX Effects actually got me closer to that sound. Now, how do I have the Minotaur set? Well, I've got it set like so here. Let's see. I've got on my gain, I have got it at, I gotta move this so I can see. I've got it at 2 on the gain. Alright, so I got it really low on the gain. I'm kind of using it almost like a boost. On the tone, I've got it at 4. And on my level setting, I goosed the level a little bit more because I wanted to kind of push the front end of the amp a little bit more. So I kicked it up to like 7.5. So I brought the tone down just a little bit because I found it to be kind of bright. So I brought it down just a little bit to kind of darken the sound a tiny bit. Trying to emulate the sound of the PRS pickups or just the way that John Christ's guitar actually sounded on the album, where it's not super bright, but it's got kind of a bland, I don't want to say dull in a bad way, but a duller sound to the guitar. So this is kind of helping to emulate that a little bit. Okay, so what I decided to use guitar-wise is I'm using this 335 because John Christ used a PRS style guitar. He used, I think it was a PRS actually, with and PRS tend to have darker sounding pickups, but like with that little bit of sparkle in the high end, but darker sounding pickups. So I think I got pretty close. I don't know. Personally, in the room, it might sound different on camera to you guys out there, but in the room, it wasn't half bad and it sounded pretty good. And like I said, if you have another Katana, you could actually try to mimic some of these settings and maybe dial down some of the treble if your Katana is a little bright. Because they can be bright, some of the smaller units. But I know the newer version this came out, the Gen 3, which I do not have, obviously. I think they have a darker sound. I honestly don't know. I'm really looking forward to hearing one of those in person so I can see whether they sound different or not. It's hard to tell from YouTube clips, as everyone knows. But anyway, if you like this kind of content, like, subscribe, leave me a comment, let me know if you think I got anywhere near it. If you think I'm totally off, tell me I'm totally off, I don't care. And if people like this series, I'll do some more, and I have some more ideas in mind for trying some more complicated stuff and seeing if we can actually get there. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm Jay Byrne, I've been your host, and I'll see you next time.